headphones. So, okay, you were saying something. Can't really hear you. That's odd. Okay. I can hear. Okay. Yeah, hello. I think you're muted. It's saying you're muted. You muted yourself on StreamYard. I still can't hear you. Hold on. How about now? This is odd. Hold up a minute. I can't hear you. I don't know what's going on. I can hear myself. I tested the audio just now and I think it's playing correctly. So okay, let me try calling you on Skype. Let's see. Hello? Same thing. I can't hear you, not even on Skype either. That's odd. Okay. No, okay, you're muted now. Maybe you should unmute.
You hear me without my headset?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, it looks like I'll buy a new headset, huh?
Yeah. I was wondering what was going on, but anyway, it's cool, Sha.
Yeah, my job was complaining they couldn't hear me, so I had to rip out my headset. It looks like I just got to get my headset replaced. I shouldn't have to replace a headset. It's like, it's indoors.
Yeah.
What's been up with you?
Yeah, well, mostly work, I guess. Yeah, mostly work. Other than that, I've been kind of cool working on that project I told you about, the data access library for F#. I'm currently writing a parser in DBML, so yeah, it's ended up becoming even more difficult than I thought, but it's going along. It's going along just fine.
You writing a parser for what?
Yeah, for DBML. So if you go to dbml.org,
database markup language. Is that what it says?
Yes, that's it actually. So they have a few parsers, I think for Python and a few others, but I wanted to write one for F#. So the main idea really is just something that can read DBML and generate types based on that, on those, on the DBML you supply. Then with those types, I can supply those types to something like Entity Framework, and then it will generate a database for you. And then when you want to query for data, right, you just the same way we use LINQ in C#, right? You just write a query expression against the database and you get objects out of it. You don't need to write SQL at all. So that's the full scale of what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you still on retention for that that website tutoring or something like that?
Yeah, Code Mentor. Yeah. Although I have kind of reduced my involvement there, so that I can focus on the project. I think the code name for now is Antelope. That's what I decided to call it anyway. So I'm still trying to get that off the ground. I think the parser is really the key. It's a very it's one of the key components, and if I'm able to get that working, then the others should be not as hard to do. So
You see my screen?
yeah, I can see your screen.
I'm loading in all these individual services. I named this topic Building Enterprise Systems with Functional Programming.
Mhm.
The question is functional programming like overrated for building enterprise systems?
I would argue no.
Is it
I
more
would
hype than what's actually in the pudding?
No, I really don't think that's the case. I think, um, do you want my honest opinion?
Yeah, I want your honest opinion.
Okay, so my honest opinion is that enterprise systems, by definition, are almost always complicated, right? And
Okay.
there is a tendency to tack on complexity. Okay, and in the past, when I started learning about functional programming, I was of the opinion that the complexity was just purely a side effect of OOP. And granted, it is true in a lot of sense, because OOP has deep complexities buried with it that come along with the fact that it's just OOP. But aside from that, you still have the possibility of writing complicated software, even if it's with functional programming. So one of the takeaways of what I'm trying to say in essence is, is that the mark of a good enterprise architect is being able to differentiate between necessary complexity and accidental complexity. Okay. And that fine line is something that is difficult to nail, especially if you're doing a project for the first time. You don't know which aspects of the system you need to focus and architect properly, and you don't know which aspects of the system you can get away with a simpler implementation. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, say I was, remember the saying when you are designing SQL databases, where they say something like normalize till it hurts, denormalize till it works. It's essentially an ode to what I'm trying to say. That something like a domain is complicated doesn't mean your software has to match that level of sophistication, right? You need
It
to be
doesn't?
able, no, it doesn't. You need to be able to make the right trade-offs for certain things. So, so it's almost like JPEG images, right? You can have, if you wanted to use an image for a thumbnail, for example, you don't need a high-res image, right? A low-res blocky image will do, because from the user's perspective, they're looking at a thumbnail. So they wouldn't, the complexity there doesn't really make that much difference, right? The extra complexity brought about by the details in the JPEG image is unnecessary. So, and at the same time, if you wanted to make a picture your wallpaper, for example, then the complexity is in that case necessary. And it's necessary because you are talking, users are going to be peeping at every nook and cranny of the image. The same thing goes with your software architecture, your software design, right? You don't know upfront which areas are going to be bombarded with changes, right? You can make educated guesses. So if it's like the core flow of an app, for example, or if it's a core use case, then sure. But without A, having a prototype that users have used, or B, having built maybe a first version of the app, you really don't know how much complexity is necessary. Yeah. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Oh, it does. The way I interpret it is you don't know how much complexity it is until you build it.
Yeah, pretty
much. It's the same thing with requirements. Like you get high level requirements, but the devil is always in the details. And if what we do is we consistently learn, right? Like you drive your car, you have your steering wheel, if you lock the steering wheel in place and just hit the accelerator, there's a very low probability that you're going to get to your destination, even if you pointed it perfectly, due to all the other factors that are going on, right? Atmospheric pressure, I don't know, elevation, potholes in the road. There's so many factors that are unplanned that could cause a misalignment, right? And so, yeah, people are like, Scott, how long is it going to take you to build? I'll tell you after I build it. Like, Scott, can you get it by this? Can you get this done by this date? If I'm allowed to ship this with bugs, I could have it whatever date you like. Right? Just look at me weird.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Part of the reason why back to your question, is functional programming overrated in the enterprise? I think my answer would be a resounding no. Why do I say this? Is because I've worked on a project, an enterprise project, functionally, and I've seen how I've seen the benefits of functional programming in those kinds of scenarios. I've also seen because the first prototype of the app we built was overly complex. It had so many moving parts, we anticipated so many things that ended up not being necessary. So what now happened was, when we were planning the version 2 of the app, we had a clearer picture of, okay, these are areas we need to maintain the level of complexity that we currently have, because it makes sense for it to be as complex as it is. And there were areas we just were able to cut down. And the beauty of functional programming is that it makes that second refactor easier, much easier, because you're not having to deal with the complexities of state, and with a very good compiler and a very good type system, you can be rest assured that, even if you do some heavy refactors down the road, it's not going to be painful, as opposed to building it in something like C# in an OOP fashion. So, yeah.
Why have you learned Haskell?
Well, it boils down to the reason I didn't learn Haskell, right? It's not because I have, a personal vendetta against it or anything like that. It's a lovely language to me. But at the time when I was learning functional programming, I was tired of just learning new things for learning new things' sake. I just wanted to learn something new, if and only if it had like tangible benefits to me. Okay, it's also the reason I didn't learn Rust. It's also the reason I didn't learn maybe NIM or any other languages, because if I'm learning a new language, I should be able to apply what I'm learning immediately. So that's what brought me to F Sharp actually. Was that I started learning Haskell so that it had its own compiler, its own IDE, its own tools, and stuff like that. And I was like, no, no, I want something that can just fit into the workflow that we currently had at the time. Because at the time I was working at a .NET shop. I still work at a .NET shop, but just having something that I know that is just going to fit in nicely. And F Sharp really did that for me, so I didn't bother learning Haskell at that point. It's also the reason I didn't learn Elm either, So, yeah.
I was listening to a talk on YouTube in which the title was called "Dysfunctional Programming with F Sharp," and I think he was trying to compare F Sharp to Haskell and the amount of quote unquote boilerplate code that you have to write in F Sharp that you just don't have to deal with in Haskell. It kind of piqued my interest. It piqued my interest, but I don't know. If Haskell has first class support in AWS, I think I'm going to leave Azure, man. It's too complicated for me. But if AWS has first class support for Haskell, I think it shouldn't be too hard of a paradigm shift to learn Haskell, right?
Dude, I'm telling you, I know I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again and again. There is no point learning all the intricacies of Azure or the complexities of Azure, right? Because if you go over to AWS, all of that is lost. You literally have to start again from scratch. And if you needed to repeat the same thing on Google Cloud, you would repeat the same thing from scratch. Now, the choice of cloud is one of those weird decisions because it's not like the choice of developer tools. The person who gets to make the decision on what cloud gets picked is the accountant, not the developers, right? Or should I say the CTO per se, not the actual people who are actually doing the coding. So because there is a lot of politics around the choice of cloud, I've even seen situations, companies where that picked AWS simply because Amazon gave them thousands of dollars in credit. It's like, how can you have that conversation with the CTO who is telling you, look, I have $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 in credit in AWS, and you're asking me to use Azure, or vice versa, or I have $100,000 of units in Azure, and you're asking me to use AWS. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
So, because that decision is a business decision, right? The technical stance, the technical decision for me is for you to take a good look at Docker and Kubernetes. And I'll tell you why. Because if you pick that, then it doesn't matter what cloud a business chooses. It doesn't matter what device, what hardware they decide to use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I thought they're like competing technologies
No.
between serverless and Kubernetes.
No.
Okay.
Kubernetes and serverless aren't competing. I think what is competing with serverless is there's a name they call this thing. I can't remember. But Kubernetes has a serverless framework built on top of it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it does. It does. So the best way to think about Kubernetes is this, right? Kubernetes is like an agnostic platform as a service. So if you think of Azure, right? Azure has a platform as a service, which includes app service, includes web jobs, includes app service, web jobs, and stuff like that. Does that make sense? And then Azure's serverless is built on top of that platform as a service. Does that make sense? So your Azure functions, for example, are built behind the scenes. They work on top of app service. Okay. What Kubernetes is Kubernetes is an alternative for that whole suite of tools. So it allows you to deploy your own platform wherever you like. And you get all the advantages of having a consistent environment, deployments, and so on and so forth. So I would strongly recommend, if you really don't want to do Azure anymore and you want to do AWS, I would strongly recommend you look at Kubernetes, especially if you decide to use Haskell. Because if you think about it, what Kubernetes also brings to the table is it abstracts the decision of what language you want to use. So if you wanted to use Haskell in a project, fine. If you wanted to use Node.js for a particular section of your project, fine. As long as everything all runs on Docker, it's all good. So yeah, Docker really takes away the requirement of using a particular language or a particular runtime. Does that make sense? Yeah. So yeah, if you ask me, if you're really considering maybe leaving Azure and looking at something else, I would strongly, highly recommend you look at Docker, you look at Kubernetes. Yeah, it's been like mind-blowing for me ever since I started learning about those two. And quite frankly, I'm never going to deploy my personal apps to any cloud directly ever again. In fact, I have my own cluster where I deploy things I want to use and all that. So it's something you should really think about, because I'm sure there are a lot of CTOs, there are a lot of people who are thinking the way I'm thinking right now, and it's only a matter of time, really. It's only a matter of time.
I've avoided Kubernetes just because the books that I've read on it, even like you spoke about it a couple of times, explain Kubernetes, and at a high level, I get it. But once I try to dig deeper, I get lost, and I'm like, and I feel like it's kind of like WPF, where like I really have to commit to understanding it and understand it first, and then spend the next probably 8 weeks, 12 weeks, like cursing and increasing my Stack Overflow reputation by merely asking questions to finally get understand. It took me a while to get WPF, but I'm sure to death that Kubernetes is probably going to be even more complicated.
I really doubt that. I strongly, highly doubt that will be the case, and I'll tell you why. I also learned WPF as well, and WPF is a beast of it. It's one hell of a technology. Like WPF it has depths that you can't begin to imagine. However, Kubernetes isn't that complicated, honestly. Like, I could show you a map that just shows you all the concepts of Kubernetes in one picture, in one image, right? It is complicated, but it's nowhere near WPF. That's for sure. I can tell you that right now. So yeah. In fact, you know what we could do? We could, pick a particular time, maybe a weekend or something, and you and I could just sit down and just maybe pick one app, use, Dockerize it and just deploy it in Kubernetes. And I can explain all the concepts to you. Like in my head, I think maybe 2 or 3 sessions is enough to get you up to speed with all the basics.
Okay. Well, remember you suggested it.
Yeah. Because
I mean, I see it as a job description or a job requirement everywhere. I doubt if it's really being used, but I see it everywhere. So it's like, I don't know. That's another discussion. How like developer job descriptions are now like the skill set of the entire department or IT department. They have a laundry list. They'll have C++, VB6. Like they'll have every single language from like 20 years ago.
But again, there's a good reason for that, and the reason it's that way is because Docker and Kubernetes signifies a paradigm shift. And if you employ developers who don't really understand it, especially Docker, not really Kubernetes per se, I think HR departments are notorious for just adding technology for technology's sake. But Docker in particular is a skill that I think every developer should have. Because if you work in that kind of environment and you have no clue what Docker is, right, you're going to struggle. That's just how it is. But the good thing is that, learning Docker is not that difficult. It's not that hard. Once you understand, okay, these are the basic concepts. Okay, this is what a Docker file does. This is how one would write, a Docker file, and this is how you'd run it locally to test if it's working and all that. I think that's the basic skill set that developers need to have. But other than that, the Kubernetes aspect, not so much. It's good it's good if everyone on your team understands it, because that way you can have each developer essentially write the infrastructure for whatever code they want to deploy, which is kind of cool, because you have to understand that Kubernetes came out of Google, right? And they have a version of, or they have like a prehistoric version of Kubernetes that they run internally, and that version, right, is such that once you are entering Google, they teach you everything about that way of thinking, that way of containerizing app, that way of deploying applications and stuff like that. So yeah, you seeing it on job descriptions is as a result of A, it's becoming very popular, and like I said, it's only a matter of time, and B, because if you don't know anything about it, you're going to at least have some catching up to do if you join that company. So that's why I think that's the case. Yeah.
Am I going to make more money learning Kubernetes, or am I just going to, like, that's the biggest thing I'm after is, like, are companies like actually compensating people for learning this, or does the compensation not go up? It's just the expectation that you know it.
Okay, I can only tell you my experience, and in my experience, I've probably made more money from Kubernetes than I have writing.net. Nah, I don't think so. It's not that much, but let's just say I've made quite a bit of money from teaching Kubernetes, from deploying Kubernetes. I deployed Kubernetes for a payment company here in Nigeria, and I was handsomely paid for that. Because companies now see that, oh, this is cool, especially companies that hate cloud, that are cloud averse. Okay, companies that just want maybe certain aspects of their system to be within their firewall, within their control and stuff like that. Kubernetes gives you like a nice trade-off, right? So the developers still get the good development experience that you would get with an Azure, and at the same time, the IT department still gets their level of control that they want. So imagine if you could deploy Azure in your own premises, right, on your own hardware itself. That's like a super win, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's the reason a lot of people are looking at Kubernetes.
Why is that a super win?
It's a super win because your developers will get a nice platform as a service model, right, where they can just quickly bundle their app and deploy their app without having to worry about the pains of configuring and deploying and all those kind of stuff, right? In other words, what Azure gives you as a developer is they give you compute, they give you resources, and you're free to just iterate quickly on it, as opposed to having someone provision a machine and you deploy on the machine and you configure the machine and all of those extra headache. That's kind of what you get from a developer and / operations, a DevOps perspective, is you don't need to it streamlines the whole application deployment and the whole platform, right? On the flip side, for the people who hate cloud, who want everything to be within their firewall, within their servers, and so on and so forth, they get to deploy Kubernetes on their own infrastructure, and they get to put whatever security, whatever network policies they want to do on top of that. Yeah, that's why I say it's a win-win in a way.
So is Kubernetes really for developers, or is it for sysadmins?
I
feel like it's more for sysadmins, right?
Not really. I would say Kubernetes is more for DevOps teams. Okay, so the concept of a DevOps team is a cross-functional team that includes both your developers and your operations. So the idea here is that when things go bad in production, you don't call the ops people, you call the developers, right? So the developers have to fix whatever problem they deployed. So Kubernetes is essentially built for that. What's the word? For that culture, for that environment. So there is still a role for sysadmins, but the role for sysadmins is not how do I explain this? So the role for sysadmins is provisioning the cluster, deploying the cluster, setting up all the core tenants. Then the rest of the operations has now been simplified and automated to the point where developers can just write code against it. Developers can essentially write and deploy infrastructure as though it's code they own. They check it into GitHub, they make edits to YAML files and stuff like that, without having to worry about all the extra complicated mess that sysadmins need to deal with, like network security, network layers, like server provisioning, IP addresses, DNS, all those kind of things. Now, I'm not knocking on sysadmins, right? Because I was a team lead, so I had to wear both hats. I had to wear both the hat of the sysadmin and the hat of the developer where I was working previously. But Kubernetes actually simplified the role of the developer to the point where it's just code. It's code the same way every other developer writes their code. It's not like you are tinkering with you're not tinkering with machines or logging into VMs or tampering with SSH or nasty stuff like that, right? That's still the job of the sysadmins. But because you've taken away some of that load from the sysadmins can now focus on what they are really there for, which is managing, setting up infrastructure, managing security, and all of that. And the developers just can get to focus on what they do best, which is writing applications and deploying applications. So I think it's a slight shift, if you will. It's a slight shift in perception. So.
Yo, man, you know a lot, man.
No, I don't. Actually, so what happened was, I told you I was a team lead where I was working before in Nigeria here, till I got a job with a Swiss company, and I've been working remotely with them. And from the day I got there, right, like I keep telling you, like it's a blessing to work with like super smart developers, because yeah, you think I'm smart until you meet some of the guys in my team, and you know that, man, there are levels to this shit.
Well, okay. I think I'm one of few Americans that acknowledge that, in general, I have reason to believe that European developers tend to be more advanced and more disciplined, and just overall better than American developers. Like, am I being biased? I don't think so, because I'm American.
No, I
sincerely believe.
Accurate.
I mean, I'm looking at the Twitter traffic, and I understand I belong to the FP community. I get that. I just feel like, but I've interviewed and I've interacted with like European developers. I've gone to European conferences, and I just feel like they're just more in tune And like I just feel like they're more professional when it comes to engineering software solutions.
Exactly.
So when you say like, you have the blessing to work with bright people, I mean, no disrespect to the people that I've worked with over the years, but it's few and far between. And I haven't worked with a European team or partner before, but I would like to experience that.
Yeah. Like I wouldn't lie to you, right? I think that's a blessing for me, and I think it would be great if you could, work with such a team, because um, you have people that when we sit down to spec a particular project, right? Um, as I'm thinking about, as we're thinking through the problem, right, of the project or whatever the case may be, and I think to myself, how would I solve? Okay, what are the loopholes in this particular solution that we've proposed? Oh, this could be the problem, that could be a problem. And while I'm thinking it, right, someone else in the team is just outlining it and outlining the solutions immediately. And it's like, oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, I didn't think of that. And yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, and because of it, I had to
It's not working.
I had to put in a lot of effort in order to catch up, in order to even keep up. And it's been really good. So for example, when I joined the team, almost my first day on the team, right, it was like, okay, you've joined us, this is what you need to know. You need to know the Docker, you need to know Kubernetes, this is how you set up your Kubernetes cluster, this is how you set up Minikube, blah blah blah, this is how you connect to the cluster, this is how you do this is how you do that. And it was like information overload. But as time went on, I had to do a lot of reading, personal reading and stuff like that, but I was able to catch up, and I was able to start, enjoying the job, So that's really, really why it seems like, oh, Odi knows a lot. I don't really know that much. It's just having to work with these technologies on a day-to-day basis for close to 2 years now. It's been good. It's been really good. I've made a lot of improvements in terms of my knowledge, in terms of my skills. So I'm quite grateful for that,
Oh, you should introduce me to them.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, shoot. Are you looking at my screen?
Yeah. You're looking for some tests.
I treat automated tests as scripts to put an app into a specific state. So like my mobile app is subscribed to some Azure subscriptions, and so I'm trying to trigger the various I don't want to know what you call it, the various elements within the pipeline. So like that one was arrived at some, and then there should be an en route one. So then I run this.
I think something just clicked in my mind, but continue.
I'm trying to test the last one, which is dropped off, or has been picked up. I mean, I need to align this to the left. Maybe I could. Can I do that right now? What is this? Hold up. It's what do I call this? Awaiting delivery, right? Awaiting delivery. How do you spell? Hold up for a second. Oh, I'm in the test. Hold up. What's this one over here? Awaiting delivery. Are you in here? No. How do I get here? Hold up. Await delivery.xaml. Well, what's on your mind?
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's fascinating to me, your workflow, the current workflow you have for testing your UI. I just think it's super fascinating because
Outdated?
No, it's not really outdated, but more like you used a different approach to do something that I've always thought was one way to do it. So
Probably is.
so how I would solve this, how I would do this, your approach, this your setup in Elmish is, in Elmish you actually have the concept of what do they call it? You have the concept of the whole state flow and all that, right? So what we do is we typically have like links on the UI itself or buttons that you could click, and all it does is generate a particular model, and then uses that model to just go straight to the state we care about without having to script our way there. Does that make sense?
Hold on. You're saying in Elm you do what? Or Elmish you do what?
In Elmish, right? We would have like maybe a particular activity that had buttons in it. We call that, maybe that had like a design, you can call it design buttons or whatever. That activity would only show up when you are testing the app. And then each button, when you click the button, it would generate a model. In other words, it would generate an entire state object that represents the exact state you expect the UI to be in. And then with that particular state object, we would just navigate to whatever UI element we wanted to test. And that way, we didn't need to script the UI to get to the point where we want. We can just click the button and it takes us straight to what we expect to see. So for example, this is asking the user for their location, right?
No. So this really doesn't have too much to do with the UI, even though I was making UI enhancements. This has everything to do with me testing my Azure subscriptions so that the customer app is receiving status updates from the courier, from historical events of the courier. And so from a test solution that's separate from the customer app solution, I'm sending Azure Service Bus messages that hits an Azure function. The Azure function relays that information to my event log, event sourcing, whatever. And then it'll extract details from that, create a new Service Bus message, publish it, in which my customer app is subscribed to a specific Service Bus message. Because it's unique to that customer, so that other customers don't get the same message, right? It's only a unique message for a unique customer.
Okay.
So that's what I'm testing.
So you are testing the entire flow, not just the app.
I'm testing the status update pipeline via Azure messages. Yes.
Okay. So that's the whole pipeline then. So it's kind of like an integration test, if you will.
So I'm manually doing this, but yeah.
Okay. That makes sense then. If it's as an integration test, then sure, it's perfect.
Yeah. So right now I'm trying to fix this last one. This dropped off. I want to get that working because it's been failing.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to. Maybe I should add some breakpoints in here. So I'm testing. Yeah. So I still got a ways to go. Submission. Yeah. See, all this stuff is still off. This event store for delivered appears to have a completely different. Oh, no, I'll figure it out later. But let me. I'm not a fan of Azure, man.
What? Why? What happened?
I get so many user errors on my Azure Service Bus, and I have no clue how to view those errors. So, like in my analytics, it'll tell me I have. If I were to go there now, which I'm not because I'm scared that it has sensitive information that someone might use to hack me.
Yeah.
If I were to go there, it would say oh, you have 1.2 thousand user errors. And I'll try to figure out what those errors are. And I can't, it won't tell me what the errors are, not intuitively. Like it's so hard for me to drill. First of all, I shouldn't have to, if I have errors, it should be easy for me to view my errors. Like you shouldn't tell me I have thousands of errors and it's rocket science for me to figure out how to use your tools for me to figure out what those errors are. And that's what Azure Service Bus is based on my experience, is like, its analytics will tell you successful messages, outgoing and incoming, but they'll tell you errors. And like, if the errors don't show up in my console window, which I mean, I'm able to figure that out. But in this case, these errors aren't coming through my console window for each Azure function. It's like, it's not showing up in there, and I have no clue how to view it. And so I pay $30 a month for Azure tech support. So eventually I'll write an essay explaining my issue and have it detailed enough so that they can walk me through how to do it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That might be necessary, you know. I think that is necessary. Not that it might be necessary, it is necessary. Yeah, like, you know, I used like I said, I used Azure where I used to work, and you know, I had good experiences with it. Although I had some really nasty experiences too, I wouldn't lie. But
Service
for
bus?
the most, no, not service bus, like just Azure in general, right? So the whole authentication approach in Azure with Azure AD and the complexities that come with that, and then things like looking for logs, right? Extracting logs was not fun. Metrics was a lot better. So if you use something like Azure App Analytics, that was cool. If you used the App Analytics, I can't remember. Anyway, yeah, Azure has some. Yeah, App Center was also very nice. Yeah, but. It's interesting though. It's interesting because I feel like I got to. I think in retrospect, I think I was happy with Azure because I kind of understood it, right? So I had gone through the pains of learning it. So by the time I kind of finally understood it, I was happy with it. But obviously, I did not use all of Azure because Azure keeps growing almost every day or every 2 weeks or something. So I didn't use aspects like Cosmos DB, like Azure Service Bus, and a few others. I didn't really use those technologies. What I just used were Azure App Service, Azure Storage. What else? I think I used Web Jobs. I also use Azure Functions, but that's about it. I didn't use any of the other stuff. So I don't think I'm actually the best person to really vet whether, you know, the technology is good or not. But based on what I've seen, AWS is going to punch you in the face.
Really? Is complicated like that?
What? AWS will punch you in the face.
Azure's like pimp slapping me in the face. AWS is way more complicated than Azure. I was hoping it would be simpler.
AWS will punch you in the face. So what
Do
makes
they at least have good documentation? Like, what would you rate their documentation compared to Azure's?
I think their documentation is just as good. I also think Azure has a lot of documentation. I think the interface of AWS is somewhat easier to play with, but the problem with AWS is that AWS is slightly low level. It's slightly too low level for my liking. So, for example, if you wanted to deploy an app on Azure, right? All you just simply need to do is just create Azure App Service and you're good to go. And then you could just upload it even has a interface. What's the name of that interface again? Kudu, where you could just go and upload your files and your app starts to run. right? On AWS, it's different. On AWS, they just give you a blank EC2 instance. So they give you like a blank machine, and they ask you to do it yourself. Even things like the way the networking is done is real. So in AWS, you can't just have a machine with an IP address that's just exposed and you just map a domain name to you just put the IP address of the machine and just put it in your domain name. It's not that simple. They have something called there's a name they call a Route 53. And that has, long story short is, trust me, AWS will punch you. The reason why AWS will punch you is because, I think they were the first. So they kind of started this whole cloud thing. And some of the low-level ideas they did, it's too late for them to change it. So they're kind of stuck with it, Recently, I was helping my cousin who works at a company where they use AWS. And he was the one I was telling you about that ran into this issue I was talking about, which is it was difficult for him to push any particular cloud because the company literally had thousands of dollars in credit in AWS. So it's like whatever cloud you feel makes it doesn't matter if Google Cloud is the best cloud in the world or whatever, right? You just can't convince someone when money is on the table, So anyway, he was deploying a Kubernetes cluster to AWS, and it wasn't good. And part of the reason it wasn't good was because he had to keep messing with their low-level networking and security things they were doing. And he had to keep messing with their routes, with their traffic configuration and firewall and all of this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's not as if it's not doable. It is doable. It's just, don't think that if you leave Azure, it will be easier on AWS. That I cannot guarantee you. I think it's actually the opposite. So, but who knows? You should probably just give it a try, and maybe it will be better. But one thing is for sure, AWS, Amazon started the whole cloud thing, so they have more experience. They have more. They have a lot of support. There's a lot of developers. I think probably more than double of if I'm just guessing off the top of my head, but a lot of people use AWS. So you definitely, if you're stuck, you definitely have documentation and stuff like that will just help you through it. So yeah, if you ask me, I'll say go for it. I'll say just give it a try, give it a look. You might actually prefer it to Azure, so it's cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know when I'm gonna do it, but I want to get this app done, man.
Yeah.
I want to get this done. Yeah, I'm noticing. This is why we don't lesson learned. Don't do REST for everything. That's been the biggest hiccup or biggest lesson I've learned for my passion project is arbitrarily doing REST calls and then spending the majority of the time trying to resolve inconsistencies between the structures between different solutions, like the parameter structures between different solutions. That's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, that's not fun. That's not fun.
What else? I just made this worse. What else is up?
Well, yeah, other than the Antelope project that I've been working on, Code Mentor has been fine. Code Mentor has been okay. But I think requests have kind of slowed down, and that's fine. I'm not really that bothered by it because, quite frankly, I needed the rest. Typically, when requests start coming, you can work all night. It's almost like Uber in a way, in the sense that if you're not careful, if you don't have like self-discipline, it's easy to overwork yourself. So, but since the requests have kind of reduced, I'm just enjoying my period right now, enjoying this lull, and also trying to see if I can use this this window to brush up on a lot of things. I plan to start looking at the JVM again, the whole JVM ecosystem, and pick one or two languages. Whether I just maybe pick Kotlin, try building web apps with it, try building and deploying web apps with it, and seeing how it goes from there. So that's what's up with me at the moment.
Build web apps using Kotlin?
Yeah, using Kotlin. Just using Java, using the JVM in particular. I feel like that aspect of my knowledge is heavily empty. There's a lot of gaps there. So I would like to at least just get flowing with it. Recently, I did a Node.js project. So Node.js is like JavaScript is like second nature to me. Like it comes so naturally that I don't really use any effort in it. But at the same time, I don't really love it because I've not been a fan of it in a while. But I did a Node.js project, and apparently I still got it's still there. It's a lot better now that you have most of the good ideas have been fully implemented. So things like promises, things like modules, things like async await. So async await has finally made its way into Node.js as well, which is cool. But Node.js isn't really my thing. So
I guess you could call him a friend now. I know this guy that going back to cloud, but you are also speaking about Node.js. He is a firm believer in Mongo. Like this dude goes, if you say Mongo, he goes ape. Like he told me he was like messing around with Azure, and now he's just undoing all his Azure and going straight Mongo. He says it's like just seamless integration with everything. Have you had any experience with Mongo?
Well, yes and no. So I've used Mongo a little bit, but that was a long time ago. I've seen I think I used it from Node.js at the time, but I've seen its implementation in .NET, and it's quite good. But the old school guy in me, right? The get off my lawn, the get off my lawn person in me is like, hell no to Mongo. Part of the reason is that Mongo is great if you are building stuff that runs in the cloud. Have you heard of the CAP theorem?
The what theorem? CAP?
Yes. CAP theorem.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that term tossed around, but I don't know what it is.
Okay, good. So it's a good time to explain what it is. So the idea is you have three tenets of distributed systems. Every distributed system has to
performance, security, and availability is kind of like perform. Well, no, I'm listening.
So you have C stands for consistency. Okay. Consistency means if I write something and I read what I wrote, I should get exactly what I wrote. So if a field in a database said 2 and I changed it to 3, okay, and I read immediately the value, I should get 3 back. I shouldn't get 2 back, okay? That's important. That's consistency. In other words, whenever there is a change applied to the system, that change will be consistent with all nodes in the change, right? That's consistency, okay? And the distributed system. So if someone were to upload, say, a document, right, and their status was to change from not uploaded to uploaded for whatever reason, right, then the fact that I've uploaded the document and the system told me upload successful, I should never see the status anywhere in my system saying not uploaded. Because if I saw that, it means that the system is not consistent. Okay. If you remember back in the day when we were using Facebook, I think Facebook have found a way to deal with it. You would type a post and click post, and nothing would happen, and it would look like, oh my God, I didn't post anything. So you would go and type that post again.
Yeah, I see it on Xamarin Forums on their forums. You publish a question or an answer, and then I feel like that's a silly mistake. Like you keep it in the button, and then you see like 5 entries of your question.
Exactly. That's a problem with consistency. Okay. Now, it seems like a silly mistake on the outside, but when you're dealing with systems that are so large, right, you will understand why that happens. And that theory is part of why that is the case. So you have consistency in one corner. You now have availability in another corner. Okay, availability means that the server should be up every time I hit it, right? In other words, I don't want a situation whereby I ask it for what's the current state of the world and it freezes on me. Then it's not available. Okay? So if I ask it, I should get a response immediately or almost immediately. That's availability. And then we have partition tolerance. Partition tolerance is the one most people don't really understand. Many people understand consistency, many people understand availability, but they don't understand partition tolerance. If you had a distributed system, like a microservice, for example, and your microservices were arranged in such a way that when you call A calls B, B calls C, C calls D, for example, right? And of course, D replies to C, C replies to B, B replies to A, and so on and so forth. In that scenario, if for whatever reason the network between B and C goes off, right? Maybe the network between them is slow. Maybe the server that is hosting C for whatever reason goes offline. Okay. The network is said to be partitioned. The system, the distributed system is said to be partitioned. If there is a disconnect anywhere in the network, then that system is partitioned. Okay. Now, partition doesn't mean that partition doesn't mean it's unavailable, because the service could still be running perfectly well, but the service can't communicate with the rest of the distributed system. Okay. So that's what partitioning means. So partition tolerance is building a distributed system that can tolerate partitioning. How do you do that? Well, some people use redundancy.
Cosmos DB.
Yeah. No, but you've just shifted the problem to Microsoft, right? So even at Microsoft, right, the guys who are going to implement Cosmos DB have to now deal with that problem. Somebody has to deal with the problem. With Cosmos DB, Microsoft deals with the problem. But imagine there was no Cosmos DB. You would have to deal with that problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So this now brings us to the CAP theorem. CAP theorem says that these 3 things are like the 3 edges of a triangle, and you can only take 2. If you take 2, one of them will suffer. So either you take consistency and availability, and your partition tolerance suffers, like SQL Server, or you take availability and partition tolerance, and your consistency suffers, like MongoDB, or you take a consistency and partition tolerance, and your availability suffers, like something like storage OS or something like that. Because in those kind of scenarios, when a write comes in, that write blocks everybody. So nobody, because they want to be consistent, when a write comes into one server, all other servers are kind of frozen, and then the write has to propagate to the others before reads can now happen, just to maintain consistency. So yeah, and one good thing, a good thing that the system designer has to do, because what we're talking about is system design actually, is you need to know what tool is good for what job. So if you are building a banking system that needs consistency, absolute consistency, maybe it was storing bank account records or something like that, you can't use MongoDB. That is dangerous. Okay. Now you could use MongoDB as a form of what's the word now? You can use MongoDB as a form of I won't say cache, per se.
Time out.
All right.
It's based on requirements. So if you're talking about globally, then consistency is something that we care about. But for example, he's doing a homeschooling administration software tool. So it's just for the United States, like maybe 3 time zones, right? East Coast, Central, and Pacific time. Right? So like Mongo is fine, right? Because you're not propagating to, I mean, you really just need one server, right? Who cares if someone in California is hitting a server in New York? Like, it's not that it's not the stock market. It's transactions. You're not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What you said is perfectly okay. So, like I said, you have to look at what tool for what job, right? So there are certain things you cannot use Mongo for. So for another downside with something like Mongo is that Mongo caches writes in memory before writing to disk. So if someone were to pull the power cable on your server, you would lose data. You don't get that with SQL Server. Okay? So that is something you should consider. SQL Server will never tell you, because of this principle of SQL databases called ACID. Atomicity, consistency, I don't remember, but yeah, regular SQL databases have this concept of ACID, which means that if the database tells you that this record has been written, you can pull the network cable, you can pull the power cord and restart the machine, and you can see that's actually written to disk. So those are some of the things that people use as a downside to rail on SQL Server and say, oh, MongoDB is the best and all that. But again, there is no free lunch. What MongoDB is trading off are things that most people don't really need per se, right? Yes, consistency is important, but how many apps actually need that level of consistency? Do you understand? So when those people use MongoDB and they tell you it works fine for me, it's like, it feels like, it's a knock on relational databases, but it's really not. Relational databases have their uses. They are very, very useful for certain things, and for other things, not so much. So, for example, in my company, we used Elasticsearch at first, and it worked very well. But what we quickly realized, because Elasticsearch and MongoDB kind of have similar architecture, they're not the same. Don't get me wrong, but they're kind of similar in a lot of ways. And we had so much problems with Elasticsearch, partly because it consumed a hell lot of memory, due to the fact that it's doing what MongoDB, something similar to what MongoDB is doing, which is it keeps data in memory, so that if you ask for it, it just serves from memory. And that now meant that managing our Elasticsearch deployment was a nightmare in and of itself. So luckily for for us, like I told you, we have very smart guys in my team. Someone was able to shout out to Mattia. Mattia is the guy that did it. Was able to rewrite a good chunk of our indexer to use Postgres instead. And not only did it dramatically cut down on the memory, but it also made a lot of queries very efficient and very quick. So we essentially eliminated Elasticsearch in favor of Postgres, and we started seeing like, absolute speed ups, if you will. So whoever is, really peddling this MongoDB thing, right? It's not bad. I'm not saying MongoDB is bad, but they should really look at, maybe they haven't deployed applications that need that level of consistency before, So that's all I'll say is use the right tool for the right job. Okay. If you're dealing with data that needs to be consistent, otherwise, bad things will happen. You definitely want to use a relational database, So.
Use the right tool for the right job, and still in 2020, majority of systems are being built in JavaScript, Java, and C#.
So Java, I can kind of understand. C#, I can kind of understand. But Node.js, hell no. No way. Like, Node.js is just, ugh. Granted, it could be worse, right? People still build shit with PHP. I think a good chunk of Facebook's user interface is still built in PHP. So, yeah, it could be worse, right? Compared to PHP, JavaScript is miles better. Like, it's not even a contest. But if you want a level of consistency, a level of peace of mind, if I give you a huge Node.js app and I tell you, if I give you a huge, okay, let me put it this way. Think of how bad a legacy C# app is, right? Think of the worst legacy.
I know how bad it is. I don't have to think of it. I can pull up a solution right now.
Now,
I refuse to work on projects because the code is so bad.
Now, imagine working on that project in Notepad without a compiler. Now, that is a new level of nightmare you've never seen before. Trust me. And that's the kind of nightmare you get when you build enterprise systems in Node.js. I tell you, I've seen them. They are not pretty.
I mean, is that not the experience for dynamic languages in general, like Ruby and all that stuff? Do they really have refactoring tools?
There you go. That you just answered the question.
I mean, it's a question, right?
No, they don't. No, they don't. So what some of them do, okay, so I'll tell you some things that have come up. So what some of them do is they have very good, so take a language like Python, for example. Python is probably one of the best dynamic languages I've seen, right? It's, even though it's dynamic, it's actually quite good. Now, a language like Python is dynamic. And because of the way the language is structured, it's easier for tools to be able to, it's easier for a tool like Visual Studio to be able to understand a piece of code. Why? Because due to the language semantics of Python and stuff like that, the IDE can infer a lot of things, even though it's dynamic, right? Which is a good thing. But even that has its limits. So there are certain areas it gets to. It's like, I don't know, you're on your own, especially when the code starts getting fairly complicated. Same thing with JavaScript. One of the ways they were able to fight that in the JavaScript ecosystem was with TypeScript. And in fact, almost anyone who is doing any form of serious JavaScript is using TypeScript. They're not writing in raw JavaScript. I have no numbers to prove what I'm saying, but I'm pretty sure of what I'm saying. And what does TypeScript do, really? TypeScript is just armor on top of JavaScript. So TypeScript brings the armor of C# on top of JavaScript. So it gives you some of the tools you use in C#, like refactorings, like
No, sustainability. So enable sustainable development, right?
Yeah, exactly. But even TypeScript has limits to how deeply it can understand JavaScript code, because there will still be function calls, there will still be method signatures that you don't know what the return types are, or there will still be callback parameters that it simply can't infer. As opposed to something like C# where everything has a specific type, and it's able to use the types to infer things. So it's one of those things where now if you're doing like a serious enterprise project that's going to need developers working on it, right? Developers are human beings too. And if you've never worked with a team of developers, especially when you have junior developers in your team, right? It's like you don't want to have to be the one to do code reviews and stuff like that. Now, somebody would argue that, the whole point of dynamic languages is to write tests. Write tests to essentially check all those misgivings and errors that people may do. But the problem with that is that you start writing flimsy tests like checking if the parameters of a particular method is called with the right parameters, for example. Why would you do that? A compiler can do that for you upfront.
I think who's the dude that wrote Doom, the video game?
What's this guy's name? This guy I love so much. Let me see.
John Carmack.
Yes, John Carmack. Yes, creator of Doom. Yeah.
He has a talk that's on YouTube in which he talks about dynamic languages versus statically typed functional programming languages, because he said that he took a sabbatical and learned Haskell. And this is when I was up in Toronto listening to his video. Okay. And something he said was absolutely correct, but people will consistently ignore it. It's so dogmatic, religious. Like he said, basically, if it's allowed to get into the system, it will over time. And and the reason why we should embrace FP type systems and compilers is there's just less errors, less issues that could get into the system. And why would we not want to mitigate risk, right? Why would we not let our compiler enforce the restriction of bad code or bad things into our code base? So he made the same point, and logically it makes sense, but people don't care. People, I don't code that way. I don't write bugs.
I'll tell you why people don't care, because, and I think I'm kind of blessed in a way, because I started out with dynamic languages. So so when people hear me attack dynamic languages, right, they think I'm attacking it from a place of vitriol or a place of tribalistic sentiment, but I'm really not. Part of the reason was I've been there. I know what it feels like to be a dynamic programmer, right? And the advantage that dynamic programming languages had was that because there was no compiler to enforce anything, right? You had freedom of expression. Okay, so you can express things however you want. You can, so one classic example of such fuckery, permits the foul language, is you could get a reference to a function, call to string on that reference, get the string representation of the code representation of the function, tweak things in it, eval, call eval on the string and get a brand new function out of it. You could do such fuckery. Such things, a compiler will never let you do that, because that's like violating all kinds of alarm bells will break out. So I get the allure of it, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's like, that is good if you are just one developer, two developer, if you are coming up, if you're still young, if you are naive enough to think that developers are going to write good code, then sure, use your dynamic languages. But if you enter into an enterprise where you have to deal with other developers and everybody's code has to work with each other after a merge, come on, you can't, no, hell no, don't even go there. Like, no, even with static languages, right? We still get to scenarios where we merge, it still compiles, but by the time you run it, you get all kinds of weird bugs. How much more a language that doesn't even have a compiler at all? It's like, no, just no. no. Yeah.
Well, I want to bet that the majority, I wonder what percentage of code has been produced without a compiler that the world runs on.
I wouldn't be surprised. Someone said if Skynet was to be written, it would be written in JavaScript.
I would think C++, but okay.
Nah, it will be in JavaScript. I can tell you that for sure.
Skynet rewrite would be in Rust. I can almost guarantee that.
You know why? Because think about it from the perspective of, okay, C++ I can kind of get, but Rust, no. Because if you think about Rust, right? Rust is like a very strict language. And Skynet, the idea of Skynet is that the computer program will become smart enough to rewrite its own code, right?
Okay.
Exactly. So something like Rust won't really work. But in JavaScript, I just gave you an example of where JavaScript can just take itself to string itself, like and messing with his own code.
I challenge what you just said.
Yeah.
What really is code? Code is language. Language is grammar. That's all it is. As long as you comply with the grammar, then you can do whatever you want, right? You've seen sys-extern errors in C++ that you struggle to decipher. I know I have. So like, yeah, I think Rust, I think it takes a longer time to compile, I thought, because of all the checks that it does. I don't know. I don't know Rust, but that's what I thought.
Okay, a better way I can explain what I'm saying is, with Rust, when you compile Rust, the Rust itself, the Rust files are gone. All you get is compiled binaries. That's it. Ones and zeros, right?
Mm-hmm.
With JavaScript, that's not the case. With JavaScript, the code is the program. There is no distinction. So if ever a program was to rewrite itself, it would probably be a dynamic language.
You know Rich Hickey, right?
Yes, I do know Rich Hickey. Yeah, creator of Clojure.
He's very philosophical of Clojure, but I also feel like he's a unicorn, and the problems that he doesn't deal with is because he's the one writing the code and it's not a normal person. Like, I want to learn Lisp, but then it's like, if it's not statically enforced, I'm afraid that, I mean, like they wrote, is it called Datomic, their database in the server? And I think they said that it's like 10,000 lines of code, which would probably be like in Java, like 100,000 or something.
That makes sense.
But I'm still willing to bet it's a nightmare to extend and maintain all that. Like, there's no compiler. Like, when you have a better understanding of the domain, and you need to start a third of what I do when I code is rename things. Like, seriously, whether it's functions or properties or parameters, I'll rename things so that it eases the cognitive load. And like, I'm almost positive they don't have those type of tools. No, but then they may raise the argument of, well, it's a completely different paradigm, so you're not refactoring as much. I don't know. Maybe I don't know if they say that, but I know if it's a paradigm shift, there's a lot of things that just go out the window that you no longer have to be cautious of, should I say?
Well, one way they try to mitigate such things is to use locally scoped variables. So if you wanted to reference another library, you would create a variable that is tied to that library, and that variable would be scoped to that library. So that if you were to rename, say, the name of that property or something somewhere else, then you would only need to change it in one line in every other file. But then it's still messy to deal with, as opposed to something like a C# or a Java or an F# or a Haskell, where the compiler can know for sure that this object A here is object A in these 5 or 10 different files. And when you tell it to rename, it knows to look in those 5 or 10 different files, which is where something like TypeScript is really, really helpful, because TypeScript is actually one of those things that adds that functionality on top of regular JavaScript, but even it has its own limits as well. So yeah, like you said, if you are dealing with superstar developers, sure, go with your dynamic languages. But if you really want to do like an enterprise thing that other people are going to contribute to, and you're going to have to be resolving merge conflict, trust me, you don't want to use a dynamic language. Now, granted, the argument they usually make, people in the dynamic team will tell you, is that they use tests to replace their compiler. So all the checks that your compiler should have done, they would use tests to make those checks. But the tests will be more extensive. In other words, the test will check other things as well. So how much of that I really like, I don't know. But personally, not a fan. I like it for things like scripting purposes. So say, for example, you're just writing tiny bits of apps, right? Say, for example, maybe you had an app that has that runs in different containers, such a thing. Then yeah, you can write it you can use a dynamic language to write small scripts and stuff like that. But that aside, is one of the reasons I like F# so much, because F# tries to play both angles. So what it does is it kind of gives you the freedom of a dynamic language like Python or something, with script files, and with the fact that it has very strong type inference, so you don't need to be nailing down types. But at the same time, it still leans into the static corporate world in a way. And in fact, in this my current project, where I'm currently using it, is that I have script files that I can quickly use for prototyping, parsing different segments of text. And when I'm happy with it, when I'm happy with my prototypes, I can now break them out into test and implementation and add that to my DLL project. So yeah, it's cool. But dynamic languages for enterprise, they are not a good fit at all. Nah.
Yeah, I don't know. I know I'm biased because I don't mess around with dynamic, but I know I know it powers a lot of things in this world. Unfortunately,
that is correct. That is correct. Do you know about this project, F***?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm aware of it. I don't know it, but yeah.
Okay, so
I brought it up.
Yeah.
I brought it up when I was on the Functional Geekery podcast, and apparently people thought I meant F#, but
yeah. So what F* does anyway? You know what F* does? It's essentially formal verification of. It allows you to do things like formal verification of programs. So an F* program doesn't just check types per se; it checks the execution as well. So it has something called what's it called? It has something else in conjunction with the compiler. It has a compiler.
I thought it was a theorem prover.
Yeah, theorem prover, exactly. Yes. So imagine someone who is right, and it has uses already. I think some people used it to prove that the latest implementation of Mozilla's SSL, was it Mozilla SSL, the Open SSL, is actually valid, right? It's actually secure. And the only reason they can do that is because, you see, the theorem prover does far more than what a compiler does. It checks the semantics of what you are trying to do. That what you're trying to do is actually what it's going to do, not just that, oh, this is an int, this is a string, and then when you multiply it or when you add two ints together, you get another int. No, this is an int, and this int has this number of possible values. It could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 3.
Oh, dependent type.
Yeah, something like dependent type, but it goes much deeper than that. So to say this thing could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 10. This integer could be 2, 4, 6, 8. Therefore, the result has to be this, space, this value space as well. So that way, it can predict if you're going to have like an invalid value up front, right? It can predict if your program was going to take a think of it like property-based test, but to 100.
Yeah, I think I understand. I mean, I think the way we do it now with like F# is we just have smart constructors that may be able to create the type that we request, or a value of a specified type that we request. And like right now, I'm explicit on all my functions for the most part. Okay. I'm explicit when it comes to their outputs, right, which are like rich types. And I mean, I don't spend that much time debugging. I don't.
Yeah. So
like, do I debug? Yeah, but I'm debugging like integration issues. I'm not really debugging logic.
Because the compiler checks that. So that's kind of what F* is trying to do. And F* is just, if you think about it, it's just, because it takes a lot to write a program in F*. F* is actually like the grade above something like an F#. So if you are writing something that is critical infrastructure, very critical infrastructure, like the OpenSSL that I just gave you an example for, then you want to make sure that you write an implementation in F*, because that way you can be sure that
I don't think it's production ready, is it?
No. It's not for how do I describe it? It's not really production ready. It generates OCaml code, if I recall correctly. Is it OCaml or F# code that it generates, and then you can then compile the F# code that it generates. I think I'm mixing it up. I'm probably mixing it up, but I do know they use. Let me see if I can find the article. Hold on. F*.
Because I was interested in learning Idris. I mean, I bought a book and I read it, and it looks promising, but it's not production ready. I don't think it's ever going to be production ready.
Well, the goal of it is not to be production ready. You don't really want to write. If it's
production ready, that means I interpret it as they're going to support issues with their compiler, or like they're telling you they stand by it. That's the way I interpret production ready, is their support.
I get you. Okay, I think I've seen the article, so I'll send you the link.
I submitted a bug to F# running on Mono like a month and a half ago. I don't think they're going to fix it, man. Because apparently I'm the only person that writes Xamarin apps using F#. It sounds stupid, but that's the way I feel.
What bug was that you came across?
I wrote in Stack Overflow, and also the user voice community, whatever that thing is for Microsoft user voice. It was let me look it up on Stack Overflow.
Okay, so yeah. Anyway, while you're looking for it on Stack Overflow, what they were talking about, what they used F* for, was for the verified cryptography. So the cryptography libraries, they wanted to verify that it didn't have any weird bugs or edge cases, right? Because obviously cryptography in one of the world's most popular browsers. If that's broken, that's really, really dangerous. So again, right tool for right job. Something like that, you would use F star. So for me, logically, if you are stepping down from that level of scrutiny and rigor, and you wanted to move to something a little bit more enterprise friendly, you definitely want to come to either an F sharp or a Haskell. And then if you really want to go down beyond that, you can go to a C sharp or a Java. But you need to have a compiler. Without a compiler, bad things can happen, because without a compiler, you are betting that it's not going to blow up in production. That's all you're doing. Because if you have minor problems, your app is not going to say anything. It's when you deployed it in production, and then that particular code gets activated, that's when you get an error, which is, just, people are so sure of their opinions, man. I won't lie to you, it's just what it is.
So you think Idris changed a lot from when the book was written? Yeah, because they got like Idris 2.0 or something. I was asking Raul, I don't know how to say his name, Raul Truza. I was asking him what was the difference between architecture and design. And he gave me a pretty good explanation that I pasted in there.
Okay, what was his explanation?
In my comment part, it says the consensus seems to be that architecture is about your components on the grand scheme of things. Is the component going to be a service or a library? How to communicate with this component, where it is hosted, what database should we use? And design is more about the internals of each component, supporting modules and libraries, how the API behaves, how composable it is. I think I agree with them.
I think, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
He's in Tijuana, Mexico. He probably don't want to broadcast that, but
well, Mexico is a big place, so yeah, I don't think you'll be able to find him if you tried.
Tijuana. Yeah, man, that's pretty much it, man. I'm bracing for a hurricane that should be touching down tonight.
Oh wow, that's not good.
Yeah,
that's not good.
Well, it's only category 1. I've been through worse.
Really? We don't really have hurricanes here. In fact, we don't have any natural disasters. The only natural disasters we have are potholes, bad governments, corruption. Those are all natural disasters. We don't have tsunamis, we don't have earthquakes, we don't have...
well, you guys have droughts, though.
Well, not every part. So, okay, so there is a good chunk of sub-Saharan Africa that is actually being invaded by Sahara Desert. So, yes, those guys do have droughts, but I stay in Lagos, for example, so we are very close to the ocean, really. Like, literally, you can just, go to the beach and stuff like that. So where I stay, we don't really have droughts like that and stuff like that. But even then, it's not on the level of, say, a natural disaster. Like, it's not so bad that people are looking for water like crazy. If you get what I mean. So,
do you guys have like Asian tourists for vacationing? Do people vacation in Lagos?
Not that I know of, but we do have Asians come around, but mostly it's people who either work here, like they have projects they're doing for the Chinese government, because I don't know if you've heard, China is trying to colonize Africa. Like, I kid you not, I'm not making
I know they built a base, I think, Djibouti.
Mm-hmm. No, but for real, they're trying to colonize Africa, and how they're doing it is actually using debt. And that's just crazy to me. They meet corrupt politicians who are willing to borrow huge sums of money to get reelected. And then the country now owes China. And then part of the deal that they sign is that if the country doesn't pay, then China can take over your your base. They can take over your country. Like literally, they did that to I think Zimbabwe also. They can just come and take over your airports, take over your take over your infrastructure. It's nightmare. China wants to fight with the US, but they need territories to do it, and they see Africa as one of those areas where they can use to gain ground. Trade routes, supply routes, stuff like that.
Resources
And things like that. And unlike the US, China is not scared of corruption. They are not moved by things that would chase away Western companies. China isn't really they aren't scared of those. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's perplexing to me too.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to say what these countries are getting in exchange. They're getting infrastructure built, right?
Are they really? Because
I thought they were.
So let me explain.
They're not getting bridges and dams and roads and all that stuff built?
No. So Scott, if I came to you and I told you, and you told me, oh, Odi, I need $10,000, right? I want to buy a new car. This car is going to make a lot of sense. Can you give me the $10,000? And I'm like, sure, why not? But I'll give you at a 10% interest rate or at a 20% interest rate. And sure, you get the $10,000 and you build the dam. But part of the thing I will sign is to say that if you don't pay back within 10 years, I can take any of your property, or I can control any of your property. And then what happens is you go ahead, you buy the car, right?
After you acknowledge with the disclaimer, and you still went through with it.
Yeah, because Scott, you are an individual. You have your best interest in mind, right? But China would go for the corrupt politicians who just want to win cheap points, who aren't really interested in the sovereignty of their nation, right? So that's where the problem is. So understand that they will now go ahead and say, oh, sure, why not go ahead and sign off to China? After all, by the time the repercussions of that deal start to play out, the person is long gone from office, probably in the US or in the UK, so China will be like, oh, fine, sure, and you take your infrastructure and everything. And then once you can't pay back, they will now come for you. And once they see that you can't pay back, the money, what you use their money to build, all that infrastructure, they take control of everything. So it's like, did you really gain? Really? You didn't. You just gave China a base in your country. You gave them sovereign powers, if you will, in your country. So the very same airports that the African countries use their money to build, right? Use the loan they use to build at the very same airports the Chinese government is controlling. So it's almost like the Chinese government came there and built the airport by themselves. You see what's going on, and that money keeps accruing debt. So China's foot is on your neck permanently. And because of the debt, it affects your economy. Your people can't generate enough GDP to be able to pay off the original capital. So you're just spiraling downwards from there.
Yeah, but I mean, look, obviously you know this more than I do, but I think the United States has a lot of debt to China as well. Like,
yes.
What's the difference? The United States has manpower and a whole bunch of artillery or China didn't have that disclaimer in the contract.
So with respect to the US, right, it's a love-hate relationship between the US and China. They hate each other, yet they love each other. What do I mean by that? China needs the US. China needs the US greatly, because you have to understand that the US controls the world economy in some ways. Every time you're fed Feds generate new notes, it has a ripple effect across the globe because many of the economies of the world are somehow tied to the dollar. International business transactions are done in dollars. So your America's economic policy ends up affecting the policy of the whole world, whether they realize it or not. For example, during this whole COVID recession thing, the Feds had to pump in a lot of money to stimulate the US economy. But that had the side effect of affecting all other economies that are somehow tied to the US. So, for example, Nigeria, when we generate oil, that our oil is sold in dollars. The prices of oil is in dollars, right? When countries want to buy oil from us, they buy it in dollars. So by devaluing the dollar, you have indirectly devalued our crude oil. Do you understand the problem?
I think I understand, but I think they choose the dollar. My ignorance is because the dollar is more stable than most currencies.
Not really.
Is it more stable than the currency that Nigeria uses?
Yes, it is. But in terms of global stability, I would even argue that maybe the Swiss franc is more stable or the British pound is more stable. But because the US is such a powerful force in world politics, in world economics, right? That ends up being the case.
Well, what I should have said was the combination of currency stability as well as circulation. There's way more US dollars being circulated throughout the world than the British pounds, or what do you call it? Nigerian currency?
Naira. The Nigerian naira.
Yeah, so naira. when you take into consideration the global scale of currency, currency is kind of like it moves, it circulates, and I think it's probably more confidence in the American dollar versus anything else. What probably comes second will probably be is it called the yen, Chinese yen, or what is that called?
It would still be the British pound.
No.
In terms of circulation, based on my experience, I don't know about other people's experience.
China has to have the largest middle class as a country.
No, yes, but you see, what I'm talking about is not just in terms of economic wealth, right? There are countries that have more economic wealth than the US, technically speaking. So a country like Luxembourg, for example, has the highest per capita income of any country in the world, period. But I'm talking about in terms of policy, right? So in terms of economic policy, the US, the UK, as a NATO group, act like the police, in a way, of the entire world. As a result, you can pretty much carry the US dollar to any country in the world and be able to change it easily. But the second next currency would be the British pound. You know, not the Chinese yen or Chinese yuan.
Well, it would be the euro, right?
Sorry, the euro. Sorry, the euro would be a close second, and then the British pound would be a third. So that's kind of what I mean in the sense that there is a lot of, if you think about what money is, what is money? Money has value because we say it has value. So imagine if a nuke were to go off and everybody were to die, then all the money in the world would be pointless, right? It has zero value. Now, in terms of value of currency, right? The US dollar still holds the most value. In other words, the US dollar is the most acceptable form of exchange anywhere in the world by far, period. A close second will be the euro before we get to the British pound, and you can now start talking about the Chinese yuan down the line. And that's just a fact. So if I had the yen, for example, and I went anywhere in the world, right, they wouldn't accept it. But if I carry the US dollar and I go to any country, no matter how remote that country is, they will accept it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they'll tax you on it, but yeah.
Yeah, sure, but the point is,
they tax me 20% in Cuba. But yeah.
The point is, they will accept it. And that's what money is supposed to do. The reason they accept it is because the US is like a global force in terms of dictating global policy, that it doesn't even, the Chinese yuan doesn't even come close. It's not even a contest at that point. In fact, I would even argue that I could spend the US dollars in China, but I can't spend the yuan in the US.
No.
Do you understand? So that's kind of what I'm talking about. In terms of value of the currency, the US dollar is the next thing after gold. It's just what it is. It's just the world we live in.
Yeah, I mean, there's exceptions, right? I can't go to Mexico and go to a restaurant and give them US dollars. Now, if I'm in a tourist hotspot, yeah, but if I'm in Mexico City, no, we don't want that. Yeah, really.
I won't take it.
No, if you're not in a tourist spot, like my argument is, they may take it if you're spending like hundreds of dollars or more, thousands of dollars, yeah. But if you're having breakfast in Mexico City at some chain restaurant and you ask for the bill and you give them a $20 bill, US, they're not going to take it.
Interesting. So, but like you admitted to,
they have to exchange it, right?
Yeah, but like you said, they will take $100 or more, right?
I think so.
Yeah, but
like if you start having large transactions, I think they will.
They will. But the point is,
you don't have to worry that much about counterfeit, right? It's hard to counterfeit. It's hard to counterfeit above a $20 bill. So.
No, but the thing I'm even, where my mind is going is that the US dollar would at least get accepted if it's large enough. But the Chinese yen is never going to get accepted. It doesn't matter if it's $100,000 worth of Chinese yen, it is not getting accepted. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get at in a way. Like, you could walk into any store anywhere in the world with $100,000 to buy, say, a car, and they will take it without question. But if I did that with the yen, not really. In fact, Naira is the worst. In fact, what happened was, the first time I traveled, right, I instinctively packed a lot of money, because in my mind I was like, who knows, I may need this money. So I packed a lot of money in my bag and traveled. And when I got to Dubai, yeah, when I got to Dubai, my brain now told me, you don't fucked up. This is not going to work. You just have paper on you right now. You have worthless bundles of paper.
You know what I do? You know what I do with my currency? Well, you can still exchange it. You just will lose, right?
That's what I'm saying. That I can't even exchange it. Period.
Oh, yeah.
That's not even an option.
You know what I did with my Trinidadian dollars? My Trinidadian dollars and my Philippine pesos. I just take it to the strip club, and that's my tips. I tip them in pesos and from third world countries, and that's how I get rid of the money that I'll never ever use unless I'm in that specific country. I just give it to strippers. So, people think I'm bad for doing that, but whatever.
Who knows? They may be able to change it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I still got some. I think I still got some British pounds, and I got some Canadian dollars. I think I still have some Filipino money too.
Yeah. Speaking of which, it's like you're back in the States, right?
What's that? Hold on, let me read that. Frontier cities used to be able to accept U.S. currency because in the past pesos just didn't come that far yet. What were you saying?
Yeah, I was saying it's like you're back in the States, right?
Temporarily, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. So how was the flight? Everybody wearing masks and all that?
The flight was empty, pretty much.
Wow.
It was maybe filled, maybe 20%.
Wow.
Well, because you know the border's closed.
So how did
I have
I
family.
don't
I have immediate family. That's why.
because you have an immediate family.
Then I'm able to cross the border. Yes.
But you're a US citizen now. Oh, okay. You mean into Canada, right?
When I go into Canada, yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. No, but I'm talking about when you are coming back to the US.
What about it?
Yeah, like how was the flight? You said you had like 20%.
Yeah, it was pretty much empty.
Interesting. Interesting. So, okay. So because you're a US citizen, even though the borders are closed, you can still fly.
Because I'm a U.S. citizen, and because I have immediate family in Canada, I can fly to
Well,
Canada.
if you did, but no, I'm talking about flying from Canada back to the US.
Oh yeah, I'm a citizen here. They can't reject me.
Okay.
I'm a citizen. I pay tax.
Interesting.
I'm a citizen. I pay taxes. Like, how can you not let me in? If they don't let me in, then that means that I don't have a state. And I'm not a citizen of any other country. So then I'll be spending the rest of my life in the airport like some people do that are stateless.
Yeah, fair point. Fair
Because
point.
when you're stateless, you can't go anywhere. You live at airports until you kill yourself or something else happens. Like, you can't go anywhere. So,
Yeah, that's rough. That's rough.
no, I mean, there's people that are in that predicament. I think families that were affiliated with ISIS, like, you know, their husbands were fighters that got killed, and so they would leave like England to go to Syria, but now like the English government doesn't want them back, or the British government doesn't want them back because they pose a security risk. And I mean, who wants to stay in Syria? Like, I mean, there's people like that, man.
That's crazy.
People that seek asylum, they piss off their native country, but the United States is able to influence other countries to not accept them. So now they're in limbo where they have a hard time. The only place you can go is the enemies of the United States. So that's what happened with Eric Snowden. He pissed off the United States government, and so I'm willing to bet he volunteered secret information to the Russian government, and they took him in.
That's
Surprised they didn't boot him after they got what they wanted from him.
well, I feel like keeping Edward Snowden in Russia is a big middle finger to the US. So, you know, as long as he's alive in Russia, you know, they know it's going to piss off the US government, especially the US military, that he leaked their information. So it's what it is.
Well, I don't know. I'll be paranoid because there could still be a random man that pulls up on the side of the street as he's walking his dog, snatch him, and pay off whoever they need to pay off to fly back to the States. I understand that Russia and the United States are not they're not cordial to each other, but I mean, like, the whole like Mission Impossible crap, like, that stuff exists, man.
No, you don't need to. You're preaching to the choir. Do you remember when the Russian spy killed a former Russian spy in the UK?
Radiation poisoning. The guy was turning green.
Yeah. So, yeah, you don't need to convince me that it exists. Like, we've seen such shit. Like, I even hear that there is Austria. You know Austria, beside Germany.
Somewhere in Europe, yeah.
Yeah, call it the spy capital of the world, because it's like that's where all the spy shit goes down. So if they want to, like, if governments want to like trade hostages and stuff like that, it all goes down in Austria. I kid you not. I think if I find I need to look for the okay, let me first put the this thing in the chat. Hold on.
There's countries I will never ever go to for fear that they would accuse me of being a spy. I'll never go to North Korea. I'll never go to Iran. I don't even think I'll ever go to Saudi Arabia. Like, I don't think I'll go to any Muslim states or any Islamic states. And I won't go, like, I'll go to China, but I won't go to North Korea, man.
What about Dubai? Would you go to Dubai?
That's risky. I wouldn't do it. Nah.
No, Dubai is fine-ish.
I know they're westernized, but I feel like I would be helpless. Like, who is more of a friend to Dubai? Is it the United States, or is it like Iran or Iraq or Saudi Arabia? Who's the biggest ally of Dubai? I want to bet it's probably Saudi Arabia or something. No.
So this is how you should think about it. The real conflict in the Middle East, I know Middle East is a very, very complicated subject, but if I'm to distill it to its purest form, it's between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That's it. Now, Dubai, UAE, and all those other countries are allies of Saudi Arabia. Then the US is allies to Saudi Arabia. The US and Saudi Arabia are allies. Iran is not an ally of the US. Iran is an ally to Russia, who is not an ally to the US, etc., etc. So if you went to Dubai, you would be mostly fine. If you went to Saudi Arabia, you would be mostly fine, as long as you don't piss them off. Like, you don't go do something. As long
blackout in the nightclub.
As long as you don't do something that pisses them off, you will be fine, right? I've been to Dubai twice. And it's quite nice there.
I was in South Beach, and I was talking to this girl, and they were from Dubai, and she was showing me a video of, I don't know if he was black or African, but they had like this swimming pool. It was like at a resort, and the walls of the swimming pool were see-through, and he was like beaten off. I'm like,
what?
No, he didn't get like executed for that? Like, I thought like, and she's like, no, they just escorted him out, and he had to leave the country. I'm like, no, they didn't execute him. Like she showed me a video of it. Like, he was in the pool, and I guess he was drunk as ever.
Yeah, he's probably drunk. That's why. The thing is, Dubai is a lot more forgiving, right? It's Saudi Arabia that, those guys don't mess around. Those guys don't fuck around. I'm telling you, I can tell you that right now. Saudi Arabia,
Yeah, well, I don't have to find out for myself, because I don't think those places are tourist friendly. I know Saudi Arabia wants to change that, but I feel like it's kind of too little too late. You don't let women. You treat women as second-class citizens. They're not allowed to drive. They're not allowed to come outside without a chaperone. Like, it's just
no. See,
who would want to go there?
Forget about that. Do you remember what happened to Jamal Khashoggi, where they caught Jamal Khashoggi?
Oh,
the one that
yeah,
the one that entered the Turkish embassy and the Saudi Arabia embassy in Turkey, and they butchered the guy. Like, nah, those guys are gangsters. Those guys don't fuck around. And apparently, allegedly, right? Whoever gave the sanction, some people say it's the prince, some people say it's not. Whatever. I don't want to know. But whoever gave the instruction to kill him, requested specifically for his fingers. It's like, what? That is some mafia shit right there. That is dark and twisted.
Well, this is the world that we live in. So
yeah, that is
dark. Don't piss any government off.
I'm telling you.
Unless you're a soldier of a
what
imperial
happens
nation.
No, I would say you can piss off the US government, right? The US government, for the most part, even the US citizens piss off the government all the time. Like, if fuck you. Like, there was a video I saw of a woman that was telling police officers were standing, and she was like, whatever, and they were saying, step back, ma'am, and she was like, oh, what are you gonna do? And then they just pushed her, and all of a sudden, outrage, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you try that,
they pushed her because they knew they were on video. Like they held back because they were on video. When there's no camera rolling, they're savages, man. They are.
Yeah, like, I'm not trying to defend them or anything, but you can't try that rubbish in Nigeria. Like, what? No. Like, get out of here. If you try that rubbish in Nigeria, oh my God. The police here are fucking brutal. You guys haven't seen police brutality. They don't kill. Or no, not that they don't kill. They do kill.
They torture.
Do kill. Yeah, they torture. And there was one I watched recently where some guys went to rob, and someone called the police. And when the police got there, the police just brought the robbers out and just shot them, just killed them straight up. No need for jury work, no need for papers, nothing. Just shot them. Papa, they died. I was like, damn, this guy is a gangster. Like, that's how they roll here. Like,
do you think they would do the same thing to a tourist? Like, if it was a Chinese or American tourist, do you think they'll still be cutthroat, or would they be scared of the retaliation of the government?
I think there is a kind of, you see, racism is very, very powerful. Do you understand? Racism as a concept is very powerful. And it's powerful in ways that people, especially white people, don't really understand. What do I mean by that? Is that I think there has been entrenched ideas, right, in the world that white people are superior, right? Up until I'm getting somewhere. Up until recent history, like up until maybe say the last 100 years. I'll give you the last 100 years, right? Up until the last 100 years, the assumption has always been, the white man has always like dominated, whether through conquering. So, for example, Nigeria, my country, all our different clans were essentially conquered, and we were all united after being conquered by the white man. So, from our perspective, there is this inbuilt bias towards white people. So if a tourist were to come here, right, in general, right, the authorities will treat that person with respect, which is the opposite of what we see when we go to other countries.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand that part. Yeah.
Yes. So if a white person were to come here, there is a kind of value that white person has that a Black American like you doesn't have, which is strange, but it's just what it is. Okay. Now, where it starts getting, sometimes things can move so left that they become right, and things can move so right that they become left. Because the value on white people is so high, it's actually risky for white people to come here because people could kidnap them for ransom. That happens. So if I were to marry, say, a white Canadian, for example, I would never bring her. No, I would bring her, but I would be very careful about bringing her to my country, because if they will see her, she becomes a target because of her value. It's almost like wearing gold chains and walking across the hood. You're begging to be robbed. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So it's kind of like that. It's fucked up, but it's just reality. I can't make this shit up. I don't make the rules. I just say what it is.
You know what the difference is though, is if I walk through Lagos and based on the way I talk, or maybe even the way I dress, they realize I'm American. They might assume I have money. and they might snatch me up or whatever. And my government would be like, no, okay. Now, if Karen, a white lady, gets snatched in Lagos, I almost promise you they're planning special forces to parachute in at 0600, and everything you see in the movies with like the silencers and the guns and all that stuff, like they send a rescue team, right? They bring out the guns, right? That's what they do for first class citizens of the United States. Second class citizens like me, they're like, well, we'll pray for him. He's in our thoughts and prayers.
Well, for what it's worth, right? If you actually came to Lagos, right, I don't think they would target you. Part of the reason is that we have a lot of Nigerians who speak like you, who have lived in the US and still come around. And one thing that easily becomes a trend is maybe someone who is a Nigerian who grew up in the US comes back to Nigeria and starts speaking like you, speaking with a proper American accent, and people try to swindle or try to shortchange him or her, and all of a sudden the person switches to Nigerian accent and be like, bros, what's in the worry now? Leave me alone now. That kind of thing. So as a result, people are used to seeing such flips. So if you came and you were speaking like the way you speak with an American accent, they would assume you are one of those people. So the chances that they would want to take advantage of you is there. It's not zero, but it's not as certain as though if, for example, you were a white guy. If you were a white guy, I can almost guarantee that that people would try to how do I put it? You would just be different.
That's different because like over here, if you're like in the hood and it's a white male, it could be a gang. The whole hood could be like gang, drugs, whatever. If they see a white man, they're not going to view him as a target. They're going to view him as like a cop. Like they will like they'll think he's an undercover cop. Why is he here? Like it's different. Like even like the way I talk or carry myself, if I go to a hood like strip club, like in the hood, like a hood bar, they think I'm a cop. They're all nervous around me, like just because I don't have the grays, I'm not wearing the dark sunglasses, I don't have the gold grill. So they perceive things differently. Like I try to tell like white people when they get paranoid, like in the streets, like no, like you're protected. Like anything happens to you, there's going to be hell to pay. Like they're going to the police will invade the city and turn it upside down until you come out alive. Like they don't want to risk that. The people want to still make money selling drugs and doing whatever they do. You're too much of an interruption to their lifestyle, right? They'll target someone like me instead. Like, they're not going to mess around with you because then that's when the government gets involved. But you're right, though. It's definitely different classes of citizens, and it's unspoken, right? But the behavior seems to repeat itself. So
interesting. That's just interesting to me, really. But it's funny how such stereotypes and such mindsets still make their way here. Who knows? Maybe part of it is the fact that America is such a dominant force in terms of even culture. So when we watch TV, we watch white people. When we are looking for new trends, new styles, new fashion or whatever, right? It's mostly, yes, we get a lot from Black America as well, but we also get a lot of influences from, white America as well. So when we now see a white person in person, it's like, oh my God, this is a white person. And
really?
yeah, Yeah, really. I kid you not. Like it's of course it's unspoken too as well, but it's there. You can't deny that it's not there. And again, like I told you, right? We experience the opposite when we go to other countries. So in other words, when we are landing in the country, the foreign authorities are like,
Check for drugs.
yeah, yeah, are you sure your passport is correct? Hold on, let me verify. I had a friend who entered the US recently, and he had to prove that he was a software engineer.
I think I heard that story. Yeah.
Like legit, he had to show them, look, I can actually code. I'm actually who you think I am. that's how.
What country was that?
From Nigeria.
No, what here in the States? Where
Yeah,
did you go?
in the US. Yeah, yeah. Was it US? Yes, it was in the
You're
US.
like, oh, you don't look like a programmer.
Yep. So it's just crazy to me. It's crazy to me. But what can we do? You know?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like when we burn down our own cities and get it to be relayed across the world, then Congress starts having reform committees, and then change starts. When you start asking nicely, nothing happens. But when you start instilling fear, then all of a sudden people want to figure out, okay, what can we do to stop this? It's amazing how something that is so taboo, something that is so frowned upon, usually serves as a catalyst for what we all want, and it's equality, something that the flag claims, but in practice, it doesn't really happen. So
yeah.
On that note, I think I'm tapping out.
Yeah, me too.
It's been real. We went from Azure functions to Kubernetes to racism and to currency. We went all over the place, man. We weren't even drinking. We were just, well, I wasn't drinking, but
yeah, neither did I. Neither did I.
Our next session, we're going to like do lines of Coke and then start talking and figure out what the conversation.
I saw a podcast recently between Joe Rogan and Post Malone, where they took mushrooms and they had a 3 hour podcast while being high on mushrooms.
Whenever I hear the word mushrooms, man, my body reacts. Like I'm done with that stuff, man. So,
yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. Anyways,
it's been
real, Odie. I'm sure it's late over there. It's 5 o'clock here. You guys are 6 hours away, right?
Yeah, so it's 10:23 now. So this is 10 p.m. at night.
All right, man. Well, we'll catch up. Thank you for the insight, and it's always good. And I just, hey, you want to record a conversation? Sure. And then like 2 minutes later, we're just streaming on YouTube. Yeah, it takes a certain type of personality for that to happen. But I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problems, man.
All right, peace.
I really enjoy our conversations. All right, bye.
Yeah, bye.